700 years ago, in a small medieval village beside a quiet river, there lived a candle maker named Thomas. He was not a king, a knight, or a famous explorer. No great battles were fought in his name, and no songs were sung about his life. He was simply a craftsman who spent his days making candles for the people of his village. His life was peaceful, predictable, and remarkably ordinary. Before the sun rose above the distant hills, Thomas slowly opened his eyes. His small wooden bedroom remained dark and silent. A faint blue glow entered through a tiny window, hinting that morning was beginning to arrive. For a few moments he remained still beneath his wool blankets, listening carefully. Outside, the world was quiet. No carts rolled along the roads. No merchants called from the market. Only the soft silence of dawn filled the air. The wooden floor creaked gently as Thomas sat up. The early morning air felt cool against his skin. He dressed slowly in a simple linen shirt and a brown wool tunic, clothing that he had worn countless times before. Nothing about his routine was unusual. Every morning followed nearly the same pattern, and somehow he found comfort in that familiar rhythm. Walking to the small window, Thomas looked out over the sleeping village. A thin layer of mist rested above the river, and the rooftops of nearby cottages were barely visible in the pale morning light. The eastern sky slowly changed from deep blue to soft silver. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed once, then silence returned. Leaving his room, Thomas made his way downstairs. In the corner of the cottage, a small stone fireplace still held a few glowing embers from the previous night. Kneeling beside it, he carefully placed a piece of wood onto the coals. A tiny flame appeared and flickered gently. Thomas warmed his hands near the growing fire and prepared himself for another ordinary day, a day much like yesterday, and very likely much like tomorrow. The workshop was never a noisy place. The only sounds came from the gentle crackle of the small fireplace and the occasional movement of wooden tools resting on the workbench. In this quiet corner of the village, time seemed to move more slowly than anywhere else. The candlemaker preferred it that way. Silence allowed him to focus on each careful step of his craft. As the wax softened over the warmth of the fire, he prepared long cotton wicks. These simple threads would soon become the heart of every candle. He carefully measured each one and arranged them neatly beside the melting wax. Nothing was rushed. Every movement followed a familiar rhythm learned over many years. The first candle of the day was always made slowly. The wick was lowered into a wooden mold, and warm wax was poured with steady hands. The candlemaker watched patiently as the wax settled into place. Outside, the village was beginning to wake, but inside the workshop, everything remained calm and still. While the candles cooled, he often sat beside the window. From there, he could see villagers beginning their daily tasks. Farmers walked toward distant fields. Bakers prepared ovens for the morning bread. Children carried water from the village well. Life moved gently through the narrow streets. Candles were more important than many people realized. In the medieval world, darkness arrived quickly after sunset. Without electric lights, families depended on candles to continue their evening activities. A single candle could illuminate a dinner table, guide a traveler indoors, or provide light for reading and sewing. Monasteries, castles, homes, and workshops all needed candles. Some required only a few, while others ordered dozens at a time. The candlemaker understood that his work served many people throughout the community. Though his craft seemed simple, it played an important role in everyday life. As the morning continued, rows of newly formed candles stood quietly upon wooden shelves. Their pale surfaces reflected the soft light entering through the window. The workshop smelled faintly of warm wax and aged timber. It was a peaceful place, untouched by hurry or distraction. By late morning, the workshop had become slightly warmer. The fire continued to burn gently, and the scent of beeswax filled the room. Thomas moved carefully between the shelves and the workbench, checking each candle as it cooled. Experience had taught him patience. Good candles could not be hurried. Some candles were made for ordinary homes, while others were prepared for the village church. The church often required larger candles that could burn for many hours during evening services. Thomas took special care with these orders, knowing they would illuminate quiet prayers and peaceful gatherings. Around midday, sunlight streamed softly through the workshop window. Dust particles drifted lazily through the golden beams. For a moment, Thomas paused his work and listened. Somewhere outside, a horse walked slowly along the road. The sound faded as quickly as it had appeared. Lunch was simple: a piece of bread, a small portion of cheese, and cool water from a nearby well. He sat alone at a wooden table beside the window. There was no rush to return to work. The candles would continue cooling whether he watched them or not. After his meal, Thomas stepped outside. The river moved slowly beneath the afternoon sun. A gentle breeze carried the scent of grass and distant farmland. Villagers passed by from time to time, offering friendly greetings before continuing on their way. The market square was calm that day. A few merchants displayed vegetables, cloth, and pottery. Children wandered between the stalls, while adults discussed the weather and the coming harvest. Life in the village followed familiar patterns, changing little from one season to the next. Thomas delivered several finished candles to a nearby baker. The baker thanked him warmly and placed the candles on a wooden shelf near the oven. As evening approached, their soft light would help illuminate the bakery long after the sun had disappeared. Walking back toward his workshop, Thomas noticed how the afternoon light had begun to soften. Long shadows stretched across the dirt road. The day was moving steadily toward evening, just as countless days had done before. When Thomas returned to his workshop, the afternoon was beginning to fade. The sunlight that had filled the room only hours earlier now appeared softer and gentler. Shadows rested quietly in the corners of the workshop. The rows of candles on the shelves seemed almost golden in the warm light. He spent the next hour trimming wicks and inspecting finished candles. Each candle was carefully examined before being placed into storage. Some were tall and slender, while others were short and sturdy. Though they looked simple, Each represented many hours of patient work. Outside, the sounds of the village gradually changed. Farmers returned from distant fields. Shopkeepers prepared to close their doors. The market square became quieter with each passing minute. The busy part of the day was slowly coming to an end. Thomas enjoyed this time of day more than any other. The world seemed to relax as evening approached. There was no hurry, no urgency, only the gentle feeling that another ordinary day had been well spent. As the sun moved lower in the sky, a soft amber glow spread across the village. The river reflected the changing colors of the evening. Small ripples carried the light downstream, creating patterns that drifted slowly across the water. A few villagers stopped by the workshop to collect candles they had ordered earlier in the week. Conversations were brief and friendly. Most people spoke softly as the evening settled over the village. Soon the workshop grew quiet once again. Thomas lit a single candle near his workbench. The small flame flickered gently, casting warm shadows across the wooden walls. It was a familiar sight, one he had witnessed thousands of times throughout his life. The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. One by one, lights glowed behind the windows of cottages throughout the village. Many of those lights came from candles made in Thomas's workshop. Without realizing it, he had become a small part of countless evenings. In homes across the village, families gathered for simple meals. Parents spoke quietly with their children. Neighbors exchanged stories from the day. The soft light of candles illuminated these peaceful moments, creating warmth in the growing darkness. Standing near the workshop door, Thomas looked out at the village one last time. Thin smoke rose from chimneys. The river reflected the first stars of the night. Everything felt calm, steady, and familiar. Thomas closed the workshop door and secured it for the night. The day's work was finished, and the shelves were filled with newly made candles. There would be more work tomorrow, but tomorrow could wait. For now, the village belonged to the quiet hours of evening. The narrow streets were almost empty. Only a few people remained outside, finishing their final tasks before bed. A dog wandered slowly across the square. Somewhere in the distance, a horse shifted gently inside a stable. Otherwise, the village was remarkably still. As Thomas walked home, he noticed the warm candlelight shining through cottage windows. Each light told a small story. Behind one window, a family was finishing supper. Behind another, a tailor was completing the final stitches of the day. Everywhere, simple lives continued beneath the soft glow of candles. His cottage stood near the river, where the sound of moving water could always be heard. During the day, the river reflected the sky. At night, it reflected the stars. Thomas often found comfort in its steady presence, unchanged through the passing seasons. Inside the cottage, the air felt warm and familiar. The fireplace crackled softly as flames danced among the logs. Thomas removed his coat and settled into a wooden chair. For a few moments, he simply listened to the sounds of the fire. There were no clocks on the wall, no machines humming in the background, no glowing screens demanding attention. The evening moved at its own natural pace. Time was measured by the fire, the darkness outside,
and the slow approach of sleep. Thomas lit another candle and placed it upon a nearby table. Its flame remained steady and calm. The small circle of light illuminated the room without disturbing the peaceful darkness that surrounded it. For many people in the medieval world, evenings were simple. Once darkness arrived, there were only a few hours left before sleep. Families talked quietly, repaired tools, mended clothing, or sat beside the fire sharing stories. Thomas spent a little time reading from a worn book that had been passed through several generations. The pages were old and slightly faded. The candlelight made the words easier to see, though he read slowly and without hurry. Eventually, the book was closed and returned to its shelf. The room grew quieter still. Outside, the stars filled the sky above the sleeping village. Another peaceful day was drawing gently toward its end.
As the evening faded into night, Thomas finished the last of his simple meal. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the cottage, casting warm shadows across the wooden walls. Outside, the village grew quiet. One by one, the doors closed, the voices disappeared, and only the occasional bark of a distant dog remained. Unlike modern cities, medieval villages were remarkably dark after sunset. There were no streetlights, no glowing signs, and no electric windows. When the sun disappeared, darkness truly arrived. The stars became brighter than most people today ever experience. Thomas stepped outside for a moment and looked toward the sky. Thousands of stars stretched across the heavens like scattered diamonds. The moon hung low above the fields, bathing the countryside in a pale silver light. For medieval people, moonlight was often the brightest light available during the night. Farmers sometimes traveled under a full moon because it illuminated paths and roads surprisingly well. Thomas listened quietly to the sounds of the night. A gentle breeze moved through the trees beyond the village. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called from the darkness. Returning inside, he carefully adjusted the fire. Fuel was precious, so the flames were allowed to burn low through the night. The warm glow slowly softened. Shadows stretched longer as the cottage settled into silence. His bed was simple by modern standards. A straw-filled mattress rested upon a wooden frame. The bedding was rough but comfortable enough after a long day of physical labor. Thomas removed his work clothes and prepared for sleep. There were no glowing screens, no notifications, and no artificial lights demanding his attention. Instead, darkness signaled that it was time for rest. He lay down and listened to the quiet crackling of the remaining embers. Gradually, his breathing slowed. The events of the day faded from his thoughts like mist drifting across a field. As the moonlight slipped through the small window, Thomas slowly closed his eyes and drifted peacefully into sleep. Several hours passed quietly. The cottage remained still beneath the moonlit sky. Several hours passed quietly. The cottage remained still beneath the moonlit sky. At some point during the night, Thomas slowly opened his eyes. This was not unusual. In medieval Europe, many people naturally woke up after a few hours of sleep. Historians today often call this pattern first sleep and second sleep. The first sleep usually lasted for several hours after sunset. Then people would awaken for a short period during the middle of the night. Thomas sat quietly on the edge of his bed and listened to the silence around him. The fire had almost disappeared, leaving only faint glowing embers. Moonlight still entered through the small window, painting silver shapes across the floor. Outside, the village remained completely silent. Most of Thomas's neighbors were likely awake as well, experiencing the same nightly routine. Some people used this quiet time to pray. Others reflected on the events of the day or planned for tomorrow's work. A few might visit neighbors, share stories, or quietly tend to household tasks. For medieval people, this period of wakefulness was considered perfectly normal. No one worried about insomnia or counted the hours until morning. Instead, the night was divided naturally into 2 periods of rest. Thomas stretched gently and looked once more toward the moonlit window. Feeling relaxed and peaceful, he returned to his bed. Within minutes, he drifted into his second sleep as the quiet night continued around him.
The hours passed quietly as Thomas rested in his second sleep. Outside, the moon slowly crossed the night sky above the sleeping village. The cottages remained dark and silent beneath the fading stars. The river continued its gentle journey through the countryside, unseen but always present. Gradually, the darkness began to soften. A faint hint of blue appeared along the eastern horizon. The stars slowly faded one by one as morning approached. Thomas remained asleep, wrapped comfortably beneath his blankets. Soon, the first birds began to sing from the trees near the river. Their songs drifted softly through the cool morning air.
A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the village square. The sound echoed briefly before disappearing into the dawn. As daylight slowly returned, Thomas opened his eyes once more. Another day was beginning, much like the countless days that had come before it. His life was not famous or extraordinary, yet it was filled with purpose, routine, and quiet satisfaction. Like millions of ordinary people throughout history, Thomas helped his community in small but meaningful ways. And so, as the sun rose over the river and the village awakened once again, another peaceful day quietly began. For Thomas, the candle maker, life continued as it always had, slowly, steadily, and beneath the gentle rhythm of the passing seasons. As the first light of morning spread across the village, Thomas remained standing beside the window for a few quiet moments. He watched the mist drift slowly above the river and listened to the distant sounds of birds beginning their day. For generations, mornings like this had greeted the people of the village. Long before Thomas was born, other candle makers, farmers, bakers, and craftsmen had looked out at the very same river and seen the very same sunrise. The seasons changed, people came and went, yet the rhythm of village life continued almost unchanged. Beeswax was among the most valuable materials used by candle makers during the medieval period. Producing it required the work of countless bees gathering nectar from flowers throughout the countryside. The process was slow and entirely dependent on nature. Every candle represented not only the effort of the craftsman, but also the quiet labor of thousands of insects working together across fields, forests, and meadows.
The scent of beeswax was familiar to nearly everyone in the village. It lingered in churches, workshops, homes, and market stalls. Even today, if we could step inside Thomas's workshop, the first thing we might notice would be that gentle, honey-like aroma floating through the air. It was a smell associated with warmth, comfort, and light during the darkest hours of the year. Winter evenings were especially important for candle makers. During the colder months, darkness arrived much earlier. Families spent longer hours indoors, and candles became an essential part of everyday life. A household that normally used only a few candles each week might require many more during winter. As a result, Thomas often found himself busiest when the weather was cold and the nights were long. Imagine standing in the center of the village on a winter evening. Snow rests lightly upon rooftops. Smoke rises from chimneys into the dark sky. Through small windows, soft candlelight glows warmly against the cold night. Somewhere, a family is sharing a meal. Somewhere else, a child is listening to a story before bed. In countless homes, candles quietly illuminate these ordinary but meaningful moments. Although Thomas rarely traveled far from his village, he occasionally heard stories brought by merchants and travelers. They spoke of distant castles, busy cities, and great cathedrals. Some described roads that stretched for hundreds of miles. Others told stories of ships crossing vast seas. Thomas listened politely, yet he never felt a strong desire to leave home. The quiet life of the village suited him perfectly. Many people today dream of adventure and constant excitement. Medieval villagers often valued something different. Stability, safety, and familiarity were considered blessings. Knowing where tomorrow's meal would come from, knowing your neighbors, knowing your daily routine. These simple comforts provided a sense of security that many people deeply appreciated. As the years passed, Thomas became known throughout the village for the quality of his candles. He did not become wealthy or famous. His name would never appear in history books. Yet people trusted his work, and that trust was worth a great deal. In a small community, reputation often mattered more than riches. Looking back, it is easy to imagine medieval life as difficult and uncomfortable. In many ways, it certainly was. Yet it also contained moments of peace that are easy to overlook. Quiet mornings, warm fires, familiar faces, the gentle glow of candlelight on a winter evening. These simple experiences brought comfort to countless ordinary people throughout history. One of the most important places in the village was the church. It stood on a gentle rise overlooking the surrounding fields, its stone walls weathered by countless seasons of rain, wind, and snow. During the day, villagers gathered there for worship, celebrations, and important announcements. But at night, the church became a remarkably peaceful place. As darkness settled across the countryside, only a few candles remained burning inside.
Their small flames flickered softly against the ancient stone walls, creating moving shadows that seemed to dance in silence. For many people, the sight of candlelight inside the church brought a feeling of comfort. It reminded them that even during the longest and darkest nights, a small light could still be found. The candles Thomas made found their way into places he would never personally visit. Some illuminated church altars during evening prayers. Others stood quietly upon the tables of village homes. A few might accompany travelers staying at roadside inns many miles away. Once a candle left the workshop, its journey became unknown. Thomas rarely thought about where each candle would eventually end up. Yet every evening throughout the region, families and strangers alike benefited from the work of his careful hands. In a way, small pieces of his daily labor became part of hundreds of ordinary moments that he would never see. Rainy days brought a different atmosphere to the village. On such mornings, thick gray clouds covered the sky from horizon to horizon. The river appeared darker, and the narrow dirt roads became soft beneath countless drops of falling rain. From inside the workshop, Thomas could hear the steady rhythm of water striking rooftops and wooden shutters. Many people disliked rainy weather, but Thomas often found it soothing. The sound never seemed hurried. It arrived gently, remained for a while, and eventually moved on. While rain fell outside, the workshop felt especially warm and peaceful.
During long storms, villagers spent more time indoors. Bakers prepared extra loaves of bread. Tailors repaired worn clothing. Families gathered around fireplaces to share stories and pass the hours. Candles became even more important during such times. Their steady glow created a feeling of warmth that helped make gloomy afternoons seem less cold and lonely. A single candle could transform a dark corner into a welcoming space where people felt safe and comfortable. Summer evenings brought an entirely different experience. The days stretched longer, and darkness arrived much later than during winter. After finishing their work, villagers often spent time outdoors enjoying the cooler evening air. Children played near the riverbanks, while adults sat together discussing harvests, weather, and village news. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond distant fields, the sky turned shades of gold, orange, and deep blue. Only then would candles begin to appear one by one throughout the village. Sometimes Thomas would sit quietly outside his cottage after a long day of work. From his chair, he could watch the changing colors of the sky reflected in the slow-moving river. Swallows darted overhead in search of insects, while distant cattle grazed peacefully in open fields. There was no need to hurry anywhere. No schedule demanded his immediate attention. The evening unfolded naturally, one moment flowing gently into the next. It was a kind of peace that many modern people rarely experience.
As the years passed, Thomas became increasingly familiar with the rhythms of nature. He could often predict rain simply by observing the clouds. He knew when winter was approaching by the way the air felt in the early morning. He recognized the arrival of spring from the songs of birds returning to nearby trees. Unlike modern life, where many people spend their days indoors, surrounded by technology, medieval villagers lived in constant awareness of the natural world around them. Perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of medieval life was the absence of constant noise. Today, many people fall asleep to the distant sounds of traffic, electronics, and machinery. Thomas knew none of these things. Most nights, the loudest sound he heard was the wind moving through trees or the gentle flow of water in the nearby river. Silence was not unusual. It was simply part of everyday life. This quietness affected the pace of life itself. Without endless distractions, people often focused more deeply on simple tasks. A meal was enjoyed without interruption. A conversation unfolded without the buzzing of devices. A walk through the countryside was accompanied only by the sounds of birds, wind, and footsteps upon the earth. Time seemed less fragmented and more complete. Hours passed slowly, allowing people to become fully present in whatever they happened to be doing. As another peaceful evening settled across the village, Thomas lit a candle and placed it beside the window. Outside, darkness gradually spread across the fields and riverbanks. Inside, the warm glow illuminated familiar furniture, wooden beams, and shelves filled with tools. It was a scene that had repeated itself thousands of times throughout his life, yet somehow it never felt ordinary. Each evening carried its own quiet beauty, inviting rest, reflection, and eventually sleep.
Years passed quietly in the village, much as they always had. The river continued its slow journey through the countryside. The seasons arrived and departed in their familiar order, and the bells of the church marked the passing of time. Thomas rarely noticed how much older he was becoming. Aging happened gradually, like the wearing of a stone path beneath countless footsteps. One year blended gently into the next. Spring followed winter, summer followed spring. Before long, another harvest season had arrived. By now, Thomas had spent decades making candles. His hands moved almost automatically through tasks that once required great concentration. He could judge the temperature of melted wax with remarkable accuracy. He could identify imperfections that others would never notice. Years of experience had transformed countless small actions into habits so familiar that they felt almost effortless. The work remained the same, but Thomas himself had changed. On quiet afternoons, he sometimes thought about the people who had taught him their craft. Long ago, when he was young, an older candle maker had patiently shown him how to prepare wicks, melt wax, and shape candles. Many of those lessons remained with him even now. The teacher had passed away years earlier, yet traces of his knowledge lived on in every candle Thomas produced. In this way, skills and traditions quietly traveled from one generation to the next. The village itself changed very little over the years. New families arrived, others moved away or passed on. Children grew into adults and eventually raised families of their own. Yet the appearance of the village remained largely familiar. The same roads connected the same cottages. The same fields stretched toward the horizon. The same river flowed past the same trees. Life moved forward, but it did so gently. Autumn was perhaps Thomas's favorite season. The summer heat faded, and the countryside became painted in shades of gold, amber, and deep red. Leaves drifted slowly from branches and gathered beside roads and fences. The air felt cooler and fresher. In the evenings, villagers returned indoors earlier, and candlelight once again became a common sight throughout the community. There was something comforting about watching darkness arrive while a warm light glowed nearby.
As harvest season ended, preparations for winter began. Firewood was gathered and stacked. Food was preserved and stored. Roofs were inspected before the arrival of snow and strong winds. Every household had its own responsibilities. These tasks were repeated year after year, not because they were exciting, but because they were necessary. Medieval life depended upon preparation and patience. During long winter nights, the village often appeared almost magical. Snow covered rooftops and fields, softening the edges of the landscape. Candlelight shone through small windows, creating tiny islands of warmth within the darkness. Smoke rose steadily from chimneys into the cold night air. The sounds of daily life seemed quieter beneath the blanket of snow. Even the river appeared calmer during winter. Thomas often reflected upon how much of human life revolved around light and darkness. Modern people can illuminate entire cities with the push of a button, but medieval villagers experienced night very differently. Darkness was respected rather than ignored. Candles were not merely decorations, they were essential tools that allowed people to continue their activities after sunset. Every flame carried practical value. Sometimes, visitors from neighboring villages stopped by the workshop. They spoke of roads Thomas had never traveled and places he had never seen. Yet these conversations rarely stirred a desire for adventure within him. He was content where he was. The familiar sights of the river, the church, the market square, and the surrounding fields provided all the comfort he needed. Home was enough. Another evening settled over the village. Thomas stood quietly outside his workshop. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road. A cool breeze carried the scent of distant fields ready for harvest. Birds crossed the fading sky on their journey toward shelter. It was an ordinary moment, much like countless others he had experienced throughout his life. Yet in its simplicity, it contained a quiet kind of beauty. Winter arrived quietly, as it always did. The mornings became colder, and a thin layer of frost often covered the fields beside the river. Before sunrise, the village seemed frozen in silence. Even the birds waited a little longer before beginning their songs. Thomas would often wake to find delicate patterns of ice decorating the edges of his small window. Inside the cottage, the fireplace became the center of daily life. Its warmth provided comfort during the coldest months of the year. Throughout the village, families gathered around similar fires, sharing meals, repairing tools, and passing the long evenings together. The glow of firelight and candlelight created a sense of safety that contrasted sharply with the cold darkness outside. Many of Thomas's candles eventually found their way into nearby monasteries. Monks often spent hours reading, writing, and praying after sunset. Their work depended on reliable sources of light. In quiet stone rooms, illuminated only by candles, handwritten books were carefully copied one page at a time. The process was slow, requiring patience and attention to detail.
If Thomas had visited one of those monasteries at night, he would have seen rows of candles casting a gentle golden glow across wooden desks and ancient manuscripts. The atmosphere would have been remarkably peaceful. Soft footsteps echoed through stone corridors, while the occasional turning of a page broke the silence. It was a world that moved at a calm and deliberate pace. Castles also relied upon candles. Though people often imagine castles as lively places filled with feasts and celebrations, much of daily life there was surprisingly ordinary. Servants worked, guards performed routine duties, and families spent quiet evenings much like everyone else. Candles illuminated hallways, dining rooms, and sleeping chambers throughout the night. As Thomas grew older, he found himself appreciating simple routines more than ever. The familiar path between his cottage and workshop, the sound of the river flowing past the village, the sight of smoke rising from chimneys on a cold morning. These small details brought comfort because they remained constant in a changing world. There was wisdom in repetition. Modern life often celebrates constant change, but medieval villagers understood the value of routine. Knowing what tomorrow would likely bring reduced uncertainty. Familiar tasks provided structure. Ordinary days, repeated again and again, created a sense of stability that many people quietly cherished. On especially cold evenings, Thomas sometimes sat close to the fire and listened to the wind moving outside. It brushed gently against the walls of the cottage and whispered through gaps between wooden boards. Yet inside, the room remained warm and peaceful. The contrast between the cold night and the warm interior made the cottage feel even more welcoming. The candle beside him burned steadily. Its flame was small, yet it pushed back the darkness surrounding it. For thousands of years, people had relied upon simple flames like this one. Long before electricity, before streetlights, before modern technology, a single candle represented comfort, guidance, and security. As the evening deepened, Thomas often allowed his thoughts to wander, not toward grand adventures or distant kingdoms, but toward ordinary memories, harvest festivals, conversations with neighbors, quiet walks beside the river, the passing of seasons. These memories formed the fabric of a life that, while simple, had been rich in its own way. Outside, snowflakes sometimes drifted slowly through the darkness. They settled upon rooftops, fences, and bare branches. The entire village seemed softer beneath a blanket of snow. Even familiar sounds became quieter. Footsteps were muffled, and the world appeared to move more slowly than usual. The church bell occasionally rang across the winter landscape. Its distant sound carried through the cold air, echoing gently across fields and frozen pathways. For villagers, the bells served as both a practical signal and a comforting reminder that they belonged to a community larger than themselves. As years turned into decades, Thomas witnessed many changes in the lives of those around him. Children grew up and started families of their own. New houses appeared. Old friends passed away. Yet, despite these changes, the village retained its familiar character. Life continued in much the same way it always had. One of the quiet joys of candle making was knowing that his work brought light to others. Though he rarely saw the results directly, Thomas understood that families gathered around the glow of his candles each evening. They read, worked, prayed, talked, and rested by their light. In many ways, the candlemaker's work reflected the rhythm of life itself. A candle began as raw wax, slowly took shape through patience and care, provided light for a time, and eventually faded away. Its purpose was not to last forever,
but to serve well during the time it burned. As another winter night settled over the village, Thomas prepared for sleep. The fire burned low, the candle flame flickered gently, and the sounds of the day gradually disappeared. Everything felt calm and familiar. The stars above the village shone brightly in the clear winter sky. Without modern lights to compete with them, they appeared countless and endless. Many villagers spent a moment each evening gazing upward before returning indoors. Thomas did the same. Standing outside his cottage, he looked toward the heavens and breathed the cold night air. The river reflected faint starlight as it flowed silently through the darkness. It was a peaceful sight, one he had witnessed hundreds of times. Eventually, he returned inside, closed the door, and settled beside the fading warmth of the fire. Tomorrow would bring another ordinary day. More wax, more candles, more familiar faces, more quiet moments. And as sleep slowly approached once again, the village grew silent beneath the stars. Candles burned low behind cottage windows. The river continued its endless journey, and Thomas drifted peacefully toward another night of rest, surrounded by the gentle rhythms of medieval life. As the years continued to pass, Thomas noticed small changes in himself. His hair had become thinner, and strands of gray appeared where brown had once been. His hands moved a little slower than before, yet they remained steady and skillful. Decades of candle making had taught them exactly what to do. The workshop had changed very little over the years. The same wooden shelves lined the walls. The same familiar scent of wax filled the air. Visitors often remarked that stepping inside felt like stepping into another time. Many of the tools Thomas used had been with him for decades. Their handles had become smooth from years of use. Every mark, scratch, and stain told a small story. Though simple, these tools had helped create thousands upon thousands of candles. Younger villagers sometimes visited the workshop to learn about the craft. They watched with curiosity as Thomas demonstrated techniques that had been practiced for generations. Some listened carefully. Others quickly discovered that candle making required more patience than they expected. Patience was perhaps the most valuable lesson Thomas had learned during his lifetime. Good candles could not be rushed. Seasons could not be hurried. Crops grew in their own time. Rivers flowed at their own pace. Much of life followed the same principle. As evening approached one autumn day, Thomas sat outside his workshop, watching leaves drift slowly from nearby trees. Each leaf followed its own path toward the ground. Some floated gently on the wind. Others settled quickly upon the earth. The scene held a quiet beauty that required no explanation. The village children who once played beside the river had become adults. Many now had children of their own. Generations came and went, yet the village itself remained familiar. New stories unfolded within old surroundings. At night, Thomas often reflected on how many evenings he had spent beside candlelight. Thousands of sunsets had faded into darkness. Thousands of flames had flickered softly beside him. Each one had seemed ordinary at the time, yet together they formed a lifetime of memories. There was comfort in knowing that not every life needed to be extraordinary. History often remembers kings, queens, and great battles. Yet most people lived lives much like Thomas's, quiet, hard-working, and deeply connected to their communities. The river continued flowing as it always had. It had been there before Thomas was born, and it would remain long after he was gone. Watching its steady movement reminded him that some things existed beyond the concerns of any single person. One particularly calm evening, the sky glowed with shades of gold and pale orange. The setting sun reflected across the river, transforming the water into a ribbon of light. Thomas sat quietly and watched until the last colors disappeared. A gentle wind moved through the tall grass surrounding the village. The sound resembled a soft whisper traveling across the countryside. It was neither loud nor distracting. It simply existed, part of the natural rhythm of the world. Inside the workshop, rows of finished candles waited patiently upon their shelves. Some would illuminate family dinners. Others would light church services. A few would accompany travelers on distant roads. Each candle carried a small purpose. As darkness arrived, Thomas lit a single candle and placed it beside the window. Its warm glow contrasted gently with the cool blue tones of the evening outside. Together, light and darkness created a scene that felt peaceful and complete. The older Thomas became, the more he appreciated ordinary moments. A warm fire on a cold evening, fresh bread from the bakery, friendly greetings from neighbors, the sound of rain falling upon the roof. Such experiences seemed small, yet they added a richness to daily life. Many modern people measure time through schedules, clocks, and calendars. Thomas measured time differently. He noticed the changing lengths of shadows, the arrival of migrating birds, the blooming of spring flowers, the first frost of winter. These natural rhythms connected him to the world around him. Life was not divided into minutes and seconds. Instead, it unfolded gradually, shaped by seasons, weather, and the steady movement of the sun across the sky. As another evening passed into night, stars began appearing above the village. One by one, they emerged from the darkness, filling the heavens with points of distant light. Thomas never grew tired of looking at them. The stars seemed timeless. Generations before him had looked upon the same sky. Generations after him would do the same. The thought brought a quiet sense of connection to the countless people who had lived throughout history. Returning indoors, Thomas settled into his chair beside the fire. The warmth felt comforting against the cool evening air. Nearby, the candle flame remained steady and calm. The cottage was quiet except for the occasional crackle of burning wood. There were no urgent responsibilities left for the day. No unfinished tasks demanded attention. Everything that needed to be done could wait until morning. This sense of completion brought a feeling of peace. The day's work had been honest and useful. Candles had been made. Orders had been delivered. The village would sleep beneath their gentle light.
Outside, the roads were empty. Most villagers had already retired for the night. Only a few faint lights remained visible through distant windows. The river reflected moonlight as it flowed through the darkness. Its steady movement created a quiet sound that blended naturally with the stillness of the night. Thomas listened for a while, enjoying the calm atmosphere surrounding him. There was nothing he needed to change, nothing he needed to accomplish. For the moment, simply being was enough. Slowly, the fire burned lower. The candle shortened as its flame consumed the remaining wax. Both seemed to mark the gentle passing of time. The room grew dimmer, yet it never felt uncomfortable. Darkness was a familiar companion in the medieval world. It signaled rest rather than interruption. Eventually, Thomas prepared for sleep once more. He checked the fire, adjusted his blankets, and took one final glance toward the moonlit window. Outside, the village rested peacefully beneath the stars. The church, the cottages, the workshop, and the river all seemed united by the same quiet stillness. And so another ordinary day came to an end. Not a day filled with adventure or fame, but a day rich with simple moments, gentle routines, and quiet contentment. The kind of day that had defined the life of Thomas the Candlemaker for many years.